What's up, everybody? Yeah. Welcome to the Mike Dolce Show. Today, I have a very exciting episode. Episode 1 of the Battle Tested series. Now, I believe this will be a long-running segment of the Mike Dolce Show podcast, but you might be asking, what is Battle Tested, Dolce? Battle Tested is where I bring in a group of high-level professionals who are battle-tested inside their industry. And of course, I got to kick it off with my foundation, the world of mixed martial arts weight management coaches. Now, the group of gentlemen I have today are amongst the most successful weight management coaches working at the very highest tier of mixed martial arts competition. That is at the UFC 5-round main event world title fights. These gentlemen work with multi-millionaire athletes fighting for tens of millions of dollars in front of hundreds of millions of humans around the world. That's right. The gentlemen here have the experience that is so rare, regardless of what people call themselves or consider themselves. Now, you know, in your job, you look around, you know the people sitting in chairs who have a title. Some titles might be equal to yours or even better, but that person is incompetent. They don't know what they're doing. They're terrible at their job, and they're just a horrible person to deal with. Well, MMA weight management has those same exact type of pretenders running around this industry pretending to be someone they're not. This battle-tested series is designed to bring you the top of the food chain, the best of the best. And I think what you will find is there is a series of common traits and tendencies amongst this group. Now, I've already filmed the entire episode, and I'm filming or recording this intro right now after the experience. You are going to love this episode. There's so much information, so much knowledge, and there are a lot of never before heard behind the scenes stories and situation that nobody would know other than us. I appreciate you being here, whether you're watching on YouTube, our Patreon channel, on iTunes, on Google Play, on Stitcher, or also on Spotify. Thank you for being a member of our audience. I appreciate you being here. I ask if you could give us a thumbs up, a 5-star review, leave a comment below for the algorithm. That would mean a lot to us. And I will do my best to continue bringing great episodes, great value to your day, to your life, not just to entertain you while you're driving to work, you're running on the treadmill, or you're trying to pass the time until your sweetheart comes home. I want to give you content and value that takes your life to the next level. And that's what this episode will do. I know you're going to love it as much as I love being a part of it. I can't believe how fast it went. We already have a part 2 that's already being scheduled. You'll learn more about that during the episode. I think that's it. Are you ready? I'm ready. Let's go on to the show.
Hey.
What's up, Mike?
What's up, fellas?
Good to see you.
Look at this crew. Holy shit. Oh, good to see everybody. Guys, of course, I appreciate you all being here, jumping on. I have a deep respect for everybody in this room, and I'm super happy to get down and chit-chat with you. I appreciate your time also, so I want to be respectful. We all have busy lives and schedules, and it's early or late, depending on what part of the country that you're in right now. So the concept of this is for a bunch of professionals to have a conversation on a few different topics. I have a few topics, and some fans of, and friends of ours on our social media accounts have asked some questions too. So we're going to chit chat a little bit about, well, primarily we all work in the peripheral MMA world, though our businesses are quite a bit more expansive than that. We don't only work with MMA athletes, and we don't only work with weight cuts. So what we do is actually, pretty robust. And I want to get down into some of that with you guys also, so those watching and those listening can have a better understanding of what we each do as individual practitioners and how we fit into this niche sport of mixed martial arts, but even more niche is weight cutting within mixed martial arts. You know, if we're too deep in it, we think that's the only thing, but at the same time, there's so much more. So I wanted to briefly, to everybody watching right now, thank you guys, and those listening, we appreciate you all for being here. I wanted to run through and introduce the group in no particular order. So we have Tyler Minton, who is the father of two and a nutrition coach to the world's top mixed martial artists and a former professional mixed martial artist in his own right. Tyler's worked with many of the top names, including one Daniel Cormier, Khabib Nurmagomedov, and many others. We have Tony Ricci. Tony Ricci is this is going to take half the show. I'm going to condense this for you, Tony. Tony is an assistant professor of exercise physiology and nutrition at LIU Brooklyn and an adjunct professor in the Department of Psychology at Nova Southeastern. Getting some feedback there. His doctorate in sports psychology and cognitive performance. He has a doctorate in sports psychology and cognitive performance and holds a master's in sports science and a master's in human nutrition. He's a licensed nutritionist, NSCA, CSCS, performance enhancement specialist, and has nearly 30 years experience with athletic performances and weight cuts in fight sports. He has a list of titles and credentials next to his name that is just massive, but has worked with, again, many of the world's top athletes, one of which is Chris Weidman, Chris Algieri, and you know, just many others. I'm not going to name everyone's resume because you guys, this is a team of just superheroes in this room right now. We have Jordan Sullivan. Jordan is an Australian dietitian holding a Bachelor of Exercise and Nutrition Science and a Master of Dietetics. He's the founder and head dietitian at The Fight Dietitian, a company that specializes in performance nutrition for combat sports athletes. Jordan's team currently works with the UFC middleweight and soon to be light heavyweight champion. We'll talk about this. Israel Adesanya, UFC featherweight champion, Alexander Volkanovski, Dan Hooker, and many more professional and amateur combat athletes across the world. We also have Charles Stool. Now, Charles Stool, known as the Angry Dietitian, very affectionately so, is the performance nutrition manager for the UFC Performance Institute. Charles he works with nearly every single coach and every single athlete competing inside the UFC. Charles's job is extremely diverse. There's so many components to this. I've been honored to work with Charles. He's just such a godsend, truly. And we're going to talk about that also, what Charles does for the sport. But Charles is also a competitive athlete himself, competing primarily in Muay Thai, correct, Charles?
That's correct.
So everybody in this room just has massive credentials from an experience, from academics, also from, you know, being an athlete in their own right. So I wanted to jump in with the group and kind of be conscious of time, but give a little bit more individual background. I just want to do like a little round robin here and ask, why MMA? Like, there's better sports out there that pay a hell of a lot more money. You got like hotter chicks, like cooler dudes, like more like television, and you know, like, why MMA? Like, what's wrong with us in this room? This is going to be like a psychiatric evaluation for all of us. Why did we get into MMA when we should be working in Lululemon yoga studios or something with all the Range Rover moms? So Tyler, you, like, what got you into MMA in like 1 or 2 minutes? I just want to go around.
Oh man. Yeah. So it probably is a need for psychiatric help. I was actually a fighter myself. I also have a Bachelor of Science in Nutrition and Dietetics. And while I was doing that, I was also a professional fighter. And it was one of the things I was using just for my own career. And, you know, I became kind of obsessed with nutrition, and it really fascinated me. And I saw such a hole in mixed martial arts, you know, where nutrition is concerned. They're just wasn't a whole lot of people, approaching it. At one time you were really the only one. And I just recognized that was a hole, and I wanted to fill that. And it was one of the things that I started off just doing it for myself, and then I branched out helping others, and more people started calling, and it just kind of blew out of things blew up before I ever really meant for them to. I never meant to retire from my own career, but my nutrition career with fighters, outran my own professional career as a mixed martial artist. And MMA's just always been a special sport to me. The reason I chose MMA over the other ones is because I sucked at all the other ones. If I was good at those, I might have stuck with those, but I just never was a team sport guy. And, I'm passionate about MMA. I'm passionate about nutrition. So I just married the two together, and, now I have the coolest job on earth.
Yep. Tony, how about you, my man?
Quickly, Mike, I think it goes back. I grew up, I'm the older man of the crew, could be most everybody's daddy here, so father age. And I grew up in the golden era of boxing. So I literally it was later in the career, but I got to watch Foreman Ali, Frazier Ali. So I fell in love with boxing at a young age and was always involved in Japanese jiu-jitsu and judo for a very, very long time. So would box at the local recreation center. So I always did a lot of fight sports. And I think the one thing that really why I gravitate to it is I'm most fascinated by fight physiology because it's so unique. It's very different than the other sports. The integration of complex biomotor qualities it requires from an athletic, performance standpoint. It's not like throwing a shot put. It's not like American football. It's just in order to excel, it's so complicated that I really love that complication. And looking what goes on in human physiology during a fight, and then you put on top of that the very one thing you need to excel during a camp, which is nutrition, and a good deal of that is taken away from you, not when it's optimized by these gentlemen, but certainly it has been in the past. So I think I gravitated toward it because I love the physiology behind it, Mike, and it's fascinating to me. It's so complicated and challenging to make it better. So that's why I went to it.
I love it. And it makes great sense. We don't get into it because it's easy, quite the contrary,
That's
right?
right.
Yep. Jordy, how about you?
Yeah, very similar to these guys. I actually grew up playing rugby. Rugby's a massive thing where I'm from, and it turns out I wasn't that good, so I had to give that up. And I actually got injured at the end of my high school career, so that's when I transitioned into martial arts, and that's when I really got into it. And same as Tyler, is when I started kind of competing, and I remember having to do my first weight cut, and I was at school and learning all this stuff, and it kind of blew my mind that despite having all this knowledge from university and whatnot, I didn't really know how to apply it in that sense, how to get your weight down over this period of time, and then what do you do when you're around the weight cut, when you're rehydrated and everything. So that kind of just started this knowledge quest, and kind of started a couple of years before I started the TFD and going, okay, how do I find information to figure out how to do this the best way possible? So yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
Excellent. Awesome. Charles?
Yeah, and so many similarities with my my personal journey in nutrition as well. As you mentioned earlier, started in Muay Thai, and in Asia, we don't really have the resources available to us. So I probably made every mistake possible, from being 6'4" and walking around at 158 pounds to rehydrating terribly and trying not to crap himself in the ring. I've done it all wrong. So it's really been a journey of really taking a look at what all components I was doing incorrectly, and just, getting in touch with so many experts in the field. I mean, I stumbled across dietetics as a way of, fueling myself. I got Dolce's diet book, and then I also met all the guys at the ISSN, Corey Peacock, Chris Algieri, Doug Coleman, Tony, of course, yourself, and really set me on this journey. And now I'm just helping these guys get all the resources they need to be successful.
I love it. And you guys touched on a few good points, one of which I want to pull on a little bit is that Tony brought up, is the diversity of the mixed martial arts athlete. Now, we all work with an eclectic group of athletes, from NFL, NHL, MLB, NBA, Olympics, amateur wrestling, kind of, it really goes the gamut, to the average, the weekend warrior, or whom I call the everyday athlete. These are just regular folks who want to look better, feel better, live better, right? But the MMA athlete's so different in the way that they compete. Let's say a 25-minute fight, right? World-class world title fights. We all have world-class 25-minute experience in this group right now. The ability to train, fuel, cut, rehydrate, peak one of these athletes is like, you know, landing the Apollo 13 mission. And that's usually the metaphor I use when I talk about weight cutting. Well, it is. You're literally sitting in the capsule, or maybe you're down at ground control, one or the other, trying to land this thing perfectly, like thread that needle. Essentially, we have to shut off all non-essential systems and only provide the right fuel at the right time for what is essential. Now, with mixed martial arts, there's a lot of different conversations. Now, right now, we've all been in the game long enough. We have the experience, but there's the keto craze right now. And that's kind of the elephant in the room. And there's some of our, I'll usually use the term peers, but there's other individuals that work with athletes. And what do? They let's say they just cut their carbs all camp. You know, cut their carbs, drop their calories, pull their sodium, pull their water, switch to distilled, overwork them into the scale. And you'll probably make weight that way if you don't die. But, you know, if you don't get hospitalized, if you don't get flagged by the doctors and the medical directors, right? We all see that. So when you look at the athlete, and this will kind of be a group conversation, so chime in as you want. What differentiates the fueling of a mixed martial arts athlete? Let's talk about training camp before we talk about the peaking phase. And I do want to differentiate between a training camp, peaking phase, off season, you know, post fight. Like, you know, we break this up into a few different blocks. But when we're in training camp and the athlete needs to be at their best, and they're doing 2 a days, some knuckleheads are doing 3 a days. They got to typically bring their weight down. Most of them are bringing their weight down 10% or more. I mean, 10%, we're actually lucky an athlete that stays within 10%. Typically, it's more. So everything on paper is already wrong, right? I don't want to work with any athlete who's walking around 10% above their ideal weight. You know, like, to be clear here. So maybe, Tony, we'll start with you. How do you look at the fueling phase of that training camp, but also take into consideration the reduction of body mass during that period of time? So then when we'll just say the peaking phase for us, we say 3 weeks out, that really starts the peaking phase. That's when the weight cut concept, not just body composition, that's when we really start to focus on kind of landing. You know, we're breaking Earth's orbit at that point, and we really need to kind of land that capsule here. So not in camp, what are you doing with your nutrition? Then everybody's going to have a chance to kind of, you know, fill in a little bit. But how do you look at that? Because the athlete has to be fueled. I think this is what I'm getting to. The athlete has to be fueled for 2 and 3 a days. Typically, the skills coaches are training them too hard, too often, too high volume, too high frequency, too high intensity, right? God forbid that they consult with us. We're an afterthought most of the time in many of the camps. And that's something we can talk about too. So I'm talking too much. Tony, jump in, please.
Well, I'm going to make it quick because I think these gentlemen could add and elaborate far beyond my capacity, Mike. But I would say this. At first, to me, the entire thing is mathematics. And what I mean by that is if you're fortunate enough to get to your point, the athlete 10 weeks out, 11 weeks out, 12 weeks, and not 3 weeks before, you have the first thing you got to know is, what is their weight now? What is the percentage of body fat? What do they have to make? And where's it going to come from? Yeah. So the first thing I do very, very, very carefully is to know the body fat, know the potential amount of fat that can be pulled from the current weight at which they are as the camp starts. Monitor the water turnover as we progress through that so I know how much they can lose. In better words, I have to create that picture. If it's a middleweight who's 212 and has to get to 185, if it's a 5x5 and a title, I've got to start doing math and saying, here's their percentage of body fat. I can get 9 or 10 of that out of fat. They are probably going to lose 2.5 in muscle. You know, I can only make an estimate with that, and that's going to bring me down a couple of pounds. Their water pulls and their turnovers are usually 4 or 5 pounds per training session pretty easily. So in better words, the first thing I want to know before I even fuel it is how are we going to get there? Can we get there? And what are we going to take off to get there? Anybody can make any weight. To your point, making weight is easy. Making weight with the acquired biomotor qualities and skills that you have accumulated during the camp and preserving them is the challenge. So what I can only do, to your point, Mike, is I have to take the training, the schedule first. Okay, here's what I need to do. Here's the estimated amount of calories. Here's the best way that I can feed them and the best meals that'll fit in there. And then to be completely honest with you, I got to hope to good God they do it.
Yep.
So that's really where it comes from. In many cases, I'm an insurance broker. I'm just managing to make sure things don't go wrong. Not always making sure how right they can go if they don't adhere.
Yeah, an awesome point. Jordan, if you could jump in and maybe kind of tag on to what Tony's saying, but also maybe bring in some of the diagnostics that you use to run some of these analysis, because I know that you do focus, you're very heavy on the evidence-based information that's out there, and you take a very scientific approach to working with these athletes.
Yeah, and it's a good point, Mike, and it's a good question to start off with, because I think it starts like this whole fight philosophy, right? And like you guys were saying, is like, what's a good performance in MMA? Like, we can get someone go in and have a barn burner 5-rounder, or they can go out and have a first round KO, and the result's the same. They still get a W on their record, but how you fuel those two systems is very different, right? And I guess like fundamentally, like what Tony was talking about, we're talking about body composition, even to the fundamental of what's the ideal body composition or performance physique for an MMA athlete. We don't really know, right? Like Tyler, you can talk for days about this, but look at Dan Cormier. He's not someone you'd look at and go, oh my God, like he's a superstar. He's one of the best ever. So I think what we do is we kind of take the evidence that we do have right now from all these other sports and we try to apply it to MMA. And that, I guess, for the first point that, you know, all of us do here is body composition analysis, because as Tony alluded to, we want to drop that body fat when we're doing this weight descent during this fight camp. So you're doing things like DEXA scans or bod pods or caliper readings, or you can use, you know, eVolt scans, but whatever you've got access to get an assessment of that body fat percentage or the amount of fat mass on there, because that's what you're putting them through to lose during this camp. So you're using that. Other things we use are things like resting metabolic rate, like metabolic testing, to understand, you know, a couple of things like, are they sitting at a point where they should be? Like they're athletes, they shouldn't be what we term hypermetabolic. If you're an athlete, you're eating well, you're training 2 times a day, you've been doing it for years, really your metabolism should be firing. But as all of us know, if you've abused your nutrition and you've abused weight cuts over years, we see quite frequently, they come in what we call hypometabolic. So assessing where they're at with their metabolism and seeing, you know what, is it even appropriate for you to be going through this weight descent, or are you just going to be slashing away at your metabolism again? Or do we need to take back and say, hey, you know what, Mike, instead of taking this fight in 8 weeks, why don't we spend a couple months, you know, restoring that metabolism, so when we go through this, we're doing it as safely as possible. And we're not doing all the things like you alluded to earlier, Mike, where we're, you know, putting them through hell and then they're, you know, hoping, crossing their fingers that the doctors are going to pass them and let them fight that night. So yeah, I think the diagnostics at the start are really important, but 2 of the big ones we like to do are the body composition and then the metabolism testing.
Excellent. And then Charles, what do you think? What do you do? So off season, how are you looking to structure more of the meal programming in the off season to make sure the athlete has everything they need from a nutrient standpoint, but they're not spilling over and keeping that, you know, excess of 10% or more body mass, which is going to turn into a dehydration, you know, critical condition once we're within that, you know, 5-day window or so?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Tony and Jordan alluded to, the weight making process, the prolonged chronic energy deficit, especially when someone is training 2 to 3 times a day, has an immense metabolic and also psychological toll on the athlete. On the metabolism piece, especially when someone is not in a fight camp phase, it's really important to get as much objective data as possible, especially around their metabolism, to see if this athlete is a candidate for what we would call a metabolic rehabilitative phase. So ensuring that based off of the respiratory quotient as well as the calories that the indirect calorimeter is telling us the athlete needs per day, we're making sure that we're at least meeting the energy needs of the athlete for their RMR as well as their energy expenditure. And quite contrary to sort of the ketogenic diet, we would definitely make sure that we have a balanced plate approach: protein, carbohydrates, vegetables, through all meals of the day, to ensure that there is carbohydrate available for all the hormones that are necessary for reestablishing one's metabolism. So that's really the goal around our pre-camp phase sort of athlete fueling.
Yes. And then Tyler, with you, I think you're a great person to add on this point, is with this concept of getting the athlete. Essentially, we're trying to get the athlete to eat the right foods at the right times that support their training, but not so much that spill over. We don't want to eat excess calories, and definitely not empty calories. And, yourself working with guys like DC, guys like Khabib, who are massive for their respective weight classes. DC going down to 205, or Khabib going down from mid 180s down to 55 or so. And I would assume, this is the assumption, as Khabib was a little more compliant maybe than DC in the off season. But how do you get these athletes, once we use the diagnostic tools, we understand where they should fall into place? Now there's another layer of coaching here outside of the ones and zeros that we all rely on. We actually have to convince the athlete to follow it. And then we have to create a plan that I say that is culturally acceptable to the athlete, that they're actually going to eat those meals. Because chicken breast, dry oats, white rice, asparagus, tilapia, boom, right? You'll get shredded eating that. You might collapse going up the stairs, but at the same time, nobody's going to follow that. So how do you implement this, Tyler, with what you do? And I look at some of your plated meals, which just look fantastic, but I can see the like you guys, I can see all the micros in every piece of color that's on the plate.
Yeah. So, man, as these guys touched on, all the data and everything's, immensely important, but me, especially where I'm at, I don't have those labs. I don't have access to that. So that's where, Charles becomes, invaluable to me, with the UFC PI. We can just send people like, hey, I need you to go get this. These guys communicate that with me. Yep. And then, my job's to get them to stay on what we need them to do. And that's the hardest part. I can tell you a million different stories about things that I've had to do that you just shouldn't have to do, but you do. And again, as a former professional fighter myself, and that's why I mentioned that, and why I'm glad you mentioned that, is because there's things that I know, because I did the same stuff. I've lived with fighters before and literally had to put Scotch tape on the kitchen cupboard door. So I knew if they were cheating, because I would wake up in the morning and check and see if the tape was off the thing. I knew they'd pulled the door open and they'd gotten a midnight snack. Yep. I've literally done those things. I've waited. I've pretended to go to bed and sat there for 2-3 hours, waiting to catch one and go into the kitchen. And it seems silly, but the problem, it's the same issue we have with anyone that we need to follow a good diet regimen. The data is one thing, but the buy-in is everything. Like, you have to get these people to buy in. And number one, I think with that, you have to form a trust with the athlete that they will, they will push back at times, but they have to respect you and trust you to take control of this, especially as, like I'm younger than some of the fighters I work with, poor Charles, is much younger than a lot of these guys. And when you're battling those kind of things, you have to talk to them on a level that they respect and they understand. And, that becomes a difficult thing. And I try to say that I want total buy-in. Like, I want these people to just have this level of trust with me that they don't even really have to know why, even though I want them to know why. I try to explain to everyone I work with why I'm doing these things, but I want them to just have this respect for me, that they just know what's best for them no matter what. And I tell these guys, I've told guys before, like, hey, I'm not comfortable working with you on this weight cut, and these are the reasons. When people have tried to hire me, and like you touched on earlier, is like, hey, like making weight is easy ultimately, But I've told these people before, like, hey, I'm not worried about you making weight for this fight. I'm already worried about you making weight for the 3 fights after that.
Yeah.
And where you're showing up to me right now, we cannot get you to a point where I can safely, I can confidently say that you can safely continue to make weight. And that's the biggest battle, is trying to convince these guys, like, hey, making weight is one part of the process. Performing is another part of the process, and what most people would think is the most important part, but it's really not. It's everything that happens in between those, and you got to deal with these guys who are literally shortening their lifespan by doing everything they can to make weight. And a large part of what I'm trying to do is just get that buy-in, try to explain to these guys so they understand, like, hey, this is a much bigger problem than you realize. This isn't about making weight. This isn't about winning. This is about you doing what it takes to go out there, perform, and come home and still live a healthy lifestyle and get to add years to your life. And that's the toughest thing, especially for a competitor, and especially for a competitor in a sport that you're getting snot knocked out of you anyway. And it all comes down to trust. And I've learned this lesson the hard way. I've had people miss weight before, and that sucks, but I can safely say I did everything right in the process, except not telling them no to begin with. Where I messed up is just accepting them as a person, accepting them as a client. And I think that's, that wasn't really the question, but the point is, I think that's where people like us practitioners have to first have the guts to just have this honest conversation. And when we see these guys, like, hey, do I think I can get you there? Yeah, but everything has to be firing at this level that I'm just not really sure you have what it takes to fire at every level there. I'm just really not sure that you're going to cover all those bases. And especially if I'm not able to be there, I just don't trust your integrity to do everything I need to do. And I think a lot more people, and me and you, Mike, have had this conversation. I think sometimes the best thing you can do for an athlete is just say, nah, I'm not working with you until you do the things that I need you to do to come in and give it your best professional effort.
Yeah, that's a great point. And towards the end of my active career working with athletes, I really became very selective. And I had a unwritten moral and ethical clause into my agreements where I would not work with athletes if I felt that morally, ethically, culturally, that we just wouldn't vibe. Oftentimes, if an athlete wanted to work together, I would go and spend a day or 2 or 3 with and around them for free to see even if we fit. Do I fit in with you? Do I fit in with your family? I want to meet your manager, your coaches. Like, is this a good fit? I want to see that. And, believe it or not, you guys probably believe it, I chose to work with less athletes than more because it just wasn't worth it to me. And I didn't feel that I would actually be able to help this human anyway, because we were so culturally divided. They believed one thing, they wanted to do one thing, they led their life in a manner that was incongruent with my morals, my values, my worldview in many ways. And I think that really helped the athlete that I did choose to work with, because we were peas and carrots. We were a perfect fit. And to your point, Tyler, they had that buy-in, and I was able to be much more effective. Also, I intentionally limited the number of athletes that I would work with, so I didn't dilute my ability to serve them. Because I always saw myself as a servant, as a missionary in some ways, to not have overly religious connotations here. But we're walking a journey with a human being during a very pivotal, dangerous part of their life, and that's the way I saw it. I'm here to help guide this person the safest possible route, knowing that it is a very difficult course that they're choosing to take part in. Now, there's been some horrific weight cuts that we've all seen and we're all aware of, and I'm not familiar with anyone in this room having a participation hands-on in that, but we've seen athletes get hospitalized. We've seen athletes get pulled from the cards, and it's not uncommon over the last few years to hear athletes discuss how they literally almost died during their weight cut. Their doctors said they almost died. They're in the ER where, their wife is saying, my God, this person almost died. Now, What is your take on that? When an athlete gets that far, where does that responsibility lie? And what, as much information, because we all probably have a couple names in mind right now, and I'm not trying to drop names, and I just want to keep it more of the general concept here. But there's some bad actors, in my opinion, in the sport that are not in it for the right reasons. They don't have the academic background, they don't have the experience, and most importantly, they don't have the integrity to actually serve the human that has hired them to do so. And again, this isn't a smear, but there's something real that's going on when athletes say, I almost died in the lead up to a competition. There's something wrong here. And what are your, kind of jump in as you will, what are your takes on that? Are there any specific instances that you saw an athlete and you were like, oh my God, like I was there. This is going back 10, 15 or so years ago. James Irvin, right? This is in the the early OG MMA days. Tony, you probably remember that. Charles, you might not have been born yet. Yeah. But this is like one of the worst, most horrific weight cuts in history. I remember seeing that. I remember seeing a UFC champion, reigning champion, multiple time champion. This is going back over 10 years or so. And I'm with one of the undercard athletes. And this guy is collapsing inside the sauna with plastics on, full sweatsuits, hats, hoodies, the whole thing. And he's shadow boxing and hard pummeling. He drops. His coach is calling him a bad word. I don't want to say it. And picking him back up, kind of, shaking him up and getting him going again. So I'm even kind of going back old school to not even, touch on more the modern idiots out there. What are your thoughts on this topic before, we'll move on to more positive stuff, but I did want to certainly touch on it with you guys.
Yeah, me personally, I think a large part of it is the culture. I think the culture of MMA has created this belief that these guys have to suffer. So that's where you see guys again. So it's sometimes it's hard to get total buy-in with these guys, but you still see some resisting that. Like, no, I've literally heard people say like, hey, if a weight cut doesn't suck, I almost don't feel ready to fight. I had someone tell me that they had the easiest weight cut of their life, and they said it was almost too easy. Like I'm so used to that being such a struggle that kind of gets me mentally ready. And I'm thinking, whoa, I don't like you're looking at this all wrong. What are you talking about? Yeah. And it's just this caveman-like culture, that comes a lot from the wrestling backgrounds of just, we have to suffer. So people do that. And then they feel weak if they start to fail, and they don't realize that it's not even like a mental weakness. It's literally the body shutting them down so they don't die. It's literally, I can't tell you, like how close I think some of these people truly have been to death. Like I don't think they understand that if their body wouldn't have shut down, the next step was death. And, and I hate it. I feel sorry as a former, athlete myself. I hate it and I feel sorry for them. But, then I see a lot of them that happens, and then they hire the same person, and then I want to feel a little less sorry for them, because I'm thinking, man, fool me once, shame on you; fool me twice, shame on me. And I think a lot of these fighters just need to go back and look and see what they're doing, and surround themselves with people that won't let that happen. They need to have an honest conversation amongst all the professionals, because that doesn't always only go down on people like us. A lot of times we're the scapegoats. Yeah. But you might have the wrestling coach over here in their ear pushing them harder and harder and harder. And it's just one of those things. These fighters have to have an honest conversation about who's around them, who they want working with them, what that person's credentials are, and like how this can change. And a lot of the fighters I just don't see doing that. Like they'll have these horrible traumatic experiences, and then they keep the same people around them, the same coaches, everyone, and nothing seems to change. It's very rare, I will say, that you see this happen to a fighter once. It's almost like the same fighter, and it just continues to happen to them over and over, and nothing's changing. Yeah. Again, they just have to change the culture and the team around them and the attitude. And I just think a lot of them just don't understand like how many layers of screwed up the whole system was.
Yeah, it becomes normalized. What do you guys think?
I'll just add very quickly. You guys hit it before. I think Tyler did great on the buy-in, really important. So regarding seeing it, well, I won't see it with myself because I can predict in advance if it's going to happen. by having the proper data. And two, I think with great frequency, though, one thing that really bothers me in weight cutting, and I think is the greatest form of blasphemy in the art and science of it, is if the approach is scaled. And if people are utilizing a relatively comparable total calorie intake, macronutrient breakdown, fluid intake for the welterweight that they are the middleweight, and those approaches are linear, and the approach is very scaled, and they don't know the athlete's optimal percentage of body fat. I think this is part of where we get into the problem, that those who systematically have a weight cutting process, we should have a weight cutting framework, and we should have something that we look to do, but there's a lot of touch and go in weight cutting. And if you don't know that touch and go, you're going to get in trouble. 2,200 calories may not be needed on one day and 25 may be needed on the other. Yep. Go home on one day, more electrolytes on the next day. And so my point to this is, gentlemen, which these guys do super well, is you have to individualize the approach. And you said that, Mike. I won't scale anything. It's why I'll never be rich, because scaling in itself is against everything, or the actual art and science of what makes each individual. Nobody fights the same. They have different body structures, different limb length, different strengths, different weaknesses. So there are many things we have to do. Tyler, and I know this, Charles and Jordan are artists as much as they are scientists. And that's where we have to do that. You know, if you see a scaled process, a weight cutting book where, well, that is how you cut weight, then stay away from it. You're going to get in trouble.
What do you think, Jordan?
Yeah, I think going back to the original question you asked, Mike, in terms of the responsibility, like I'm not sure what it's like in the States, but like where I am, like we have what's called duty of care. So if I take someone in and I do my assessments, I'm the practitioner in duty of care. So I take care of their health all through that process, right? So if this happens and something goes wrong, I'm completely liable. You know, I have millions and millions of dollars worth of public liability insurance and indemnity insurance for that very reason. And so I should, because it's a dangerous practice. As you have been talking about, you're manipulating someone's physiology and body composition to the extremes, right? And I think the philosophy we have, and we have systems within our team to kind of flag where these athletes are at different points. And Charles and Clint Wattenberg have been phenomenally helpful in helping us design these. Whenever I see this and I see someone on the scale really struggling, I almost think that shouldn't happen, because you should have seen that from a mile away. If you've done your assessments correctly, and if you've done all the things we were talking about, if you did your body composition, if you did your metabolism testing, if you put these guys, you did your assessment, you did your medical assessments, you did everything else right, you should know if that suits them for that weight class. There's certain things that we might not know the exact numbers for these guys. We don't know what the most optimal body fat is for a male or female to have, but we do know what critical body fat levels are for a male and female. So when you do your assessments, this is the physical lowest limit of weight that you can possibly get to. We know with the data we do have that we can probably manipulate pretty safely, if you do it right, up to 10% just in fluid and sodium. So once we get that point, you're left with a number. And you should be able to make a clinical judgment and say, hey, look, you either can or you can't, or if it's going to be tough, you should know that, and you should be preparing that athlete, and you should be having that conversation. Hey, look, this is going to be tough. We're pushing these limits, and these are like the stopping points. If this happens, we're going to call it. If this happens, we're going to call it. And going to your point, I think, and I'll play the boring scientist card of being the research guy. I think we're starting to see that now. I think 10 years ago, even 5-10 years ago, we never knew what was happening. You see these guys do these terrible weight cuts, and you're just like, man, that sucks. Like, he looks like a zombie. He looks like he just knocked on heaven's door, but whatever. Like, the next day he comes out and he looks fine. But it's like, acutely, maybe, yeah, he gets through it. But what's happened chronically when you do this over time? Like Andy Kasper's paper from 2018 showed when someone, like, I've got the numbers here, he lost in the 8 weeks, 18% of his body weight. In that final week, he lost 21 pounds. And then in the 24 hours, he cut 16 pounds through dehydration. And then what did we see? Drastic reduce in metabolic rate, huge drop in testosterone. They couldn't even complete a VO2 max test on him because he was there. The researchers, when I interviewed them, said they couldn't even draw blood. He was that fluid volume depleted. And then things like cortisol through the roof. He was showing signs of clinical hyponatremia, which puts you at risk of seizure, going into a coma. And this guy, he had dangerous levels of creatinine, which means he had acute kidney damage. And that was just from one big weight cut. So now that we're starting to get the science around it and we're starting to see, okay, what's actually happening when you do these dangerous cuts? Yeah, you may be able to rehydrate, and we're pretty good at it. Like, we're pretty smart with that stuff. We can plump these guys back up and you can get them in and fighting, but that's great and all. But what's happening chronically when you're doing this over someone's career? Yeah. And it's not just, okay, what happens at that fight? You're responsible for that athlete's health long term. You've taken on that duty of care. So I think it's really important. That's why we always bang on diagnostic tests. You should know. You should be able to see this from a mile away, and it's your responsibility as a practitioner. Don't just look after them in the acute time. It's chronically. They're your responsibility.
Yeah, excellent. And Charles?
So
you see
it's
the
a little
worst,
bit more challenging. Yeah, so because we're at every show, and I can't stress enough how important it is to have this kind of umbrella of trust. When an athlete that I know Tyler's working with, the first thing I do is I reach out to Tyler, I reach out to Jordy, because they know so much more about the athlete's individual physiology than I could ever know by just meeting them the first thing on fight week. Yep. Still, we still have to come up with some screening tools to help us make the most informed decisions around how fueling and risk when an athlete comes into fight week. And that's why at every single check-in, we're sending an athlete like our nutritional status check-in survey. We're understanding the water intake tactics they're utilizing over fight week. Because believe it or not, there's still a lot of athletes out there that are doing a water taper, where they're dehydrating themselves for 5 days leading up to the weigh-ins. Still a thing. And then female athletes, right? Menstrual status. Right. Some athletes are affected by it. Some female athletes aren't, and it's no big deal. Yeah. So these are all the screening tools that we have to apply and utilize to understand the athlete that's entering fight week and assess their risk and ability to make weight. And just for the listeners out there and any other practitioners that are in the field, I think some important things to keep in mind. And first and foremost, it's simply how much over the weight class you are Thursday night when you need to initiate the acute water cut. An athlete's historical weight cutting norm. So are they arriving a lot heavier than normal, or are they under? History of weight making issues. So something we encounter a lot is that weight cut PTSD, we call it. It's kind of our, and I've seen it time and time again. An athlete's had a really traumatic weight cut in a bathtub, for instance. The moment their feet touch the hot water, there's a hyperventilation. It's the body's mechanism for protecting itself from an incredibly traumatic PTSD-like event. Mm-hmm. So an athlete's hydration status going into the acute weight cut, like I said, is the athlete on a water taper or not? Female athletes, and of course, right now with COVID, there's a lot of these abbreviated training camps where athletes are not physically prepared as they could be leading into a fight camp. And I get it. These guys have a bottom line. They have to fight. They have to pay the bills. They may be taking fights on late notice. And because of that, they may be entering detrained or heavier than they typically would be. So these are all the variables that we have to look into as risk factors. And also with regards to COVID, a lot of typical weight cut modalities are no longer available to athletes. You can't go off site and find a public sauna because I'm sorry, but everything's closed. It's a bubble now. Yeah. All you have accessible to you is this portable sauna. And if you have a big weight cut and you're sitting in that position for hours and hours on end, if it doesn't break you physically, it'll break you mentally. So, yeah.
Yep. This is a great segue into the psychological side of weight cutting, which is very overlooked, I believe, and not understood at all by many, which is why I wanted to touch on this with you guys. Is, let's say the athlete's doing rather well. They followed the protocols. Their weight is where it needs to be. They go into fight week. Everything's going well. And then their girlfriend breaks up with them. They miss the plane. leaving the best training camp of their life. They get stuck in Dallas, Texas, or Sao Paulo, Brazil for 2 days, like I did once upon a time, sleeping on the floor and whatever it might be. The psychological side, the biochemical response to a uncontrolled emotional situation. Have you seen, or do you employ, and I'll kind of lead first, do you employ any protocols? Do you hedge for that? And with our own practice, we would anticipate that in advance. The same thing with females. We assume every one of our female athletes will have what we call lady time, which is her menstrual cycle. We bake that into the cake, hopefully, to Tony's point, 12 weeks out. Regardless of when she's lined up, it's going to be fight week. And in fact, it's going to be 2 days before weigh-ins. Bam, it's going to go sideways. We bake that in. And if it doesn't happen, well, it's bonus time. We get to eat more, rehydrate earlier, and kind of move through. So on the psychology side, the emotional side, we always tried to the best of our ability, and this is a part 2 of the question, the ability for the fighters team to allow us the ability to control this situation. And I say that we said we use the Microsoft model. The athlete is Bill Gates. I am a department head working unilaterally with the other department heads, whomever that may be. Maybe it's the agent, maybe it's the manager, the MMA coach, the wrestling coach, the Muay Thai coach, the boxing coach, the jiu-jitsu coach, the leg lock coach. There's typically 8 or more chiefs, in the or chefs, I should say, in the kitchen here. Very challenging, and it's not a good corporate model. No other corporation runs like that. MMA, unfortunately, does. But in that, I always tried to establish that the athlete is Bill Gates. They're the head. We work unilaterally. I try and communicate unilaterally with the team's roles, responsibilities, abilities to communicate back and forth. Rarely is that well received, because that typically came across as being a challenge to someone's authority, possibly, which is unfortunate, because I don't want to teach anyone how to shoot a double leg or escape an arm bar at all. I got more other things I got to worry about in my day. But regardless, the ability to help the athlete as maybe a bottleneck, to help them construct their training, the volume, the intensity, to kind of help with that. I think we, more than anyone, maybe if they have a competent strength coach, many strength coaches are not as competent with an MMA athlete that maybe we are as specialists, to understand the actual periodization, the programming into a peaking weight cut, rehydration, performance. And then the ancillaries, which is the ops team, the communications team, all the PR that needs to be done, the manager, the agent, tickets for the Uncle Ed and cousin Joey who haven't seen the athlete in 3 years. Like, all of this stuff is all happening at the same time. And especially the higher up the athlete is on the card, the more this is amplified. And I only bring this to share to the viewer that might not get this deep inside look of what actually happens at the elite level. You have a multi-million-dollar athlete getting ready to fight a world-class killer in the most important bout of their life, and their brother-in-law is busting their balls about getting tickets for the kid they went to high school with. Their agent or manager is trying to wrangle ringside seats for himself and the girl he just picked up on Tinder. And it's the truth, right? The old lady or the girl or the guy, male or female athlete, she's getting pissed off or he's getting pissed off because they're not getting the attention they feel they should be getting on fight week. They didn't get to hold the dude's hand walking across the stage or whatever else. All this shit's going on too. And we understand from a psychological, emotional, biochemical level, this is creating a shit show inside the athlete that then makes our job as weight management professionals so much more challenging. The wrestling coach, the jiu-jitsu coach, they're kicking back beers, eating wings and pizza while we're sitting in the fucking hot tub at 11 o'clock at night with the athlete who's asking us if they can suck on a strawberry, right? So all these assholes, pardon my lie, I don't care. I'm not trying to get hired here. All these fucking assholes, they shoot their shit, then they walk away and they go to the fucking grinder or whatever the hell they're doing, and they go hook up at the bar. Sorry. And that athlete is then left there with all the chaos, all the stress. And as you guys know, being alone in that bathroom, in that tub, and I do want to talk about the temperature of the tub because there's some crazy ideas out there, but being alone with the athlete, crafting this ideal weight cut, that's a very challenging process. It's like, you know, a shaman in an ayahuasca ceremony, right? You're kind of like trying to create this, cultivate this experience and kind of like mood and just like the PTSD concept, which is absolutely true, man. I see it. A lot of the athletes I work with were the worst. These are athletes that missed weight multiple times. And then they fucking call me to come in and save the day, right? Get them back on track. So that was kind of my specialty when I was focused on it. Thiago Alves and Johnny Hendricks and fucking Rampage and Vitor Belfort. Like these guys were bad weight cutters, right? They all had these levels of stress. They've spoken about that. So with you, and I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff here, but I just want the viewer and the listener to really understand it's not about chicken breast and quinoa, right? It's not about, high intensity interval trainings. It's not about, double jab, cross, step off, shoot the leg. That's not what this shit is. There's so much more. That stuff you pick up in the 10-year journey, right? Jabs and footwork and all that stuff. Yep, that's all string together. I'm talking about fight night, fight week, that last 24, 48, 72 hours before, when 10, 15 years of hard work and grind gets fucking turned to shit because your fucking old lady is pissed off that you got a DM from some, pro-ho on IG. And then we're like, this is real. Everything I'm saying happened. So I got stories about single thing I'm saying. This shit happens in real time. And then we have to put that back together. And if we put it back together, nobody knows we did. Nobody knows it happened. And the fucking boxing or the jiu-jitsu coach gets all the credit because in the 24th minute, this motherfucker is able to have the power and the ability to fucking drop a two-piece and put this kid down and walk through fucking fire and take all the big shots and not have any disruption in their performance. And we don't get any of that, any of the glory, really. And it's not about getting the glory for sure, but it's for those listening and you guys in this room and to give credit to the other high-level practitioners that are out there. I'm an advocate for you guys, especially at this state in my career. I'm an advocate for the unsung heroes behind the athlete that put it all together. Now, there's amazing striking, amazing wrestling, amazing coach. I'm great friends with most of them, but a lot of them don't even know what we do, and they don't even respect it or consider how important what we do. We make them all look good. So to back that all up, and I really wanted to focus on the emotion, the psychology, the biochemistry. Is there anything or any piece to add? Do you have a protocol that you look towards? And I know we certainly did going into this. Anything that you want to add on that little topic or the little rant I just dropped on everybody? Or any little stories you want to share? Because Lord knows, I want to hear about these DMs.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing I try to do with that. I try to have an honest conversation with the fighter before, and this is coming in handy. I want to say, is there any issue going on right now? Is there any drama? I just get to the point. Is there any drama I need to know of? Is there anybody you don't want in the weight cut? I've literally created a safe word before for this fighter to use if so-and-so walked into the weight cut and they wanted them out, for me to politely get them to go out. I mean, these issues. I had a wrestling coach once. A fighter was starting to struggle a bit, which happens. And the wrestling coach, who is someone I greatly respect, came in and started telling them that, well, we need to do this, and was really just passionate that they needed to completely change the plan and go a whole different route. And I was like, hey, that's fine, but can we game plan for a minute? And I took him, because I didn't want to argue in front of that athlete. And I took him into a separate room. I was like, hey, you've got to stop. I was like, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I said, this is the issue. I was like, you're the wrestling person and you're the best. I think you're one of the best. I said, but this is what I do. And even if you feel really strongly about your opinion, you're creating doubt and dissension in a group where this person has paid me for my opinion, and they're bringing me in as a professional, and you're causing a lot of mistrust and a lot of doubting here. I said, but if you like, and this is truth, I said, if you like, I'll just call Ariel Helwani right now and tell him that you're going to be handling the rest of the weight cut, and I'm just going to take over the wrestling, and we'll just let it go from there. And they kind of laughed a little bit and was like, okay. And they did. They left the room and it did that. And you just have to take control that way. You have to kind of tell the fighter and tell everyone around, it's like, hey, this is my domain. Like, this isn't yours anymore. Like you can't do this. And it's extremely tough, because I have seen that. I've seen breakups happen literally before the weight cut. Like, while I can think of a time a breakup happened while the water was running. And, I've seen deaths happen. I've seen all of these things happen days of, and some of those things you can't control, but you just have to control what you can. And I go back to that full buy-in. I can't control all this outside stimulus, but I can control how it's handled, and I can control the way the fighter allows me to handle things. And that's just an honest conversation I have to have with all my fighters before. And it's very much like, hey, it has to be me. You have to be willing to listen to me, unless I defer to someone, like Charles or Clint and these other guys, that are coming in to support. But it's our way or the highway, and that's really the only way to accept it.
Yeah. Yep.
I can add, that was Ty was right on with that too, and having to manage that. And you brought up another wonderful point, Mike. They're human beings. You hear people raving and about how, when I go to work, I do it. Why didn't this guy train hard? When I go to work 7 days a week, I work. You're not working in front of 5 million people, so we don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Okay, it's easy to say that. These are human beings, and all those problems and issues, I've seen that happen in 9 minutes that you mentioned.
Yep.
All of that to one person in 9 minutes.
Yep.
Okay, but one of the things I do is, under those circumstances, we have to control human physiology. Okay, autonomic nervous system function, sympathetic dominance, catecholamine response, stress. So in the very beginning of camp, I teach a lot of mental skill training, a lot of progressive relaxation techniques, rhythmic breathing, and teach the athlete how to control their own physiology. The thing is, it needs 12 weeks of training like anything else. So first thing is always, I do a readiness routine. Before every training session, I build it with them. Every sparring session, every training session, they do the same 15 things, whatever it is they want to do. Because what that'll do is, if we consistently train that under good circumstances, we are building an environment and an autonomic response that is favorable, even to the extent that when something bad happens, you won't mitigate the anxiety from it completely, but you'll have a response that is better suited than arbitrarily trying to navigate through it. The other thing too is, I teach a lot of rhythmic breathing at night with motor imagery, relaxing, self-talk cues, how to relax the heart rate, how to quell sympathetic dominance. And I've done this with my own life. So the point is, when all those things happen, they have a 6-minute breathing routine, self-talk routine, imagery routine that has been practiced 3 times a day, and they're quiet, and it automatically quells, to an extent, some of these negative circumstances, because they've already built that innate response. That's the sports psychology side of it.
Yep.
So I really like to have that available, because as Tyler pointed out, and you pointed out, man, there is sometimes, like I said earlier, we're just trying to manage things from going wrong, because people, to your point, have no clue how multifaceted it is back there. But the sports psychology side is wonderful. In closing, we really can control our own physiology, obviously far more than we think, but it requires diligent practice, and it has to be done 12 weeks out. And right now I use a separate routine, and I've been using it for 30 years, no matter how nervous I am, as soon as I say the automatic words, breathe at a given rate, I quell the anxiety, because that's the natural response that occurs to it. You cannot operate faster than you breathe. There's a lot to be said for deep rhythmic breathing, quelling and controlling anxiety when possible.
Yep. Excellent. Charles? Yeah,
Tony, I couldn't agree more. Cultivating psychological resiliency is a 52-week athlete approach to performance. It's such an underused utilized skill set that athletes need to invest time in. It's just as important as your aerobic capacity, your energy system, your skills development. Incredibly important in an athlete's preparation. At the end of the day, if an athlete believes it's going to be successful or believes it's not, both are correct. Both are correct, right? From a practitioner perspective, my approach is to always be accessible, reliable, and create familiarity. With all the chaos that athletes are undergoing over fight week, the most stressful time of their fight preparation phase, I want them to know that the one pillar that will always be consistent will be myself, nutrition, and the practices that I want to employ. I will say as well, going into the weight cut itself, and all of you guys can chime in with this too, having an action plan, and granted, things change, right? Like an athlete may have always cut weight in a bath, but all of a sudden something's not going right. They can't tolerate it for some reason. But still having an action plan in place, periods of time under heat, passive heat, active heat, etc. Having those things in place is very helpful in having an athlete be able to manage some of the stress that they're going through heading into fight week. I will say too, on that psychological resiliency piece, this is actually something that Jordy does a lot of work with, but heat acclimation is also an incredibly important aspect of the fight preparation and helps with creating resiliency to that acute heat process. So Jordy, on to you.
Perfect segue.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say, Mike, the toughest weight cut I've done with an athlete, we've done probably 8 camps together, was when, to your point, 3 weeks before the fight, he broke up with his girlfriend. And it's just, you do everything the exact same. And it's cortisol, right? Like I say to people, cortisol is great for 2 things: getting you out of bed and making sure you run fast when that bear's chasing you. And that's about it. And then, you know what? And so then back to Tony and Charles' point, something we do, and I guess this comes out of, I'm in a unique position because there's not a lot of people in Australia and New Zealand that do what I do. And there's not a lot of teams, right? So we have like very close-knit circles, and we're a very, very close team. Like I think that's very well known, especially say with city kickboxing, very, very tight relationship. We all have a role, and Eugene, the head coach, has kind of all put us in there, and we all respect each other's role. So to Tyler's point, when he was talking about a coach coming in, I was just recently with one of the guys from CKB, and there's a striking coach, and they get along phenomenally. He's helped him so much, but come the weight cut, he can't be in the room. And I'm the guy that has to communicate that. But there's that level of respect within the team that if I say, hey, can we do this and can you move, they'll do it, because as much as the striking coaches and the wrestling coaches are getting them ready for that fight, I'm getting them ready for that weight cut. That's why I'm in part of the team. And as part of that, like Charles alluded to, I always view it, okay, every week you do sparring and you do fight simulation to get ready for that fight. We need to get ready for the weight cut. So something we do a lot is, like Charles said, the heat acclimation. So we schedule in, if you're going to be sitting in a bath come that time, or a sauna, we need either post-training or a separate training session where we're drilling that, and you're mentally getting ready for that. You're mentally preparing yourself. And then the other big thing we use is breath work. And we do that for all year round. Like Tony said, it's a phenomenal thing when someone can control their physiology. And anyone that's sat in a bath or a sauna for an extended period of time, what happens is your heart rate goes up. And then a good, effective way to control that is through breathing. And I think another thing to add is just that personal layer. Like I have on my phone, on my Spotify playlist, it's ridiculous. I have a playlist for all my top level athletes, because I know certain things that will trigger when it gets tough during that weight cut. I know if I play certain songs at certain times, they'll push, they'll go through, or it'll relax them and it'll bring their heart rate down. Or if there's a time where they need to amp up, then I know there's a playlist for that. Or if there's a time where I need to talk to them, I know that we need to talk about their kids, or we need to talk about their partner, or talk about the big picture. We can do that. Or there's times where I just need to sit there and shut up. So it's like all that psychological thing, like you said, Mike, so many little things that go into it. But from the outset, it looks like we just dumped them in a tub. They sweat a lot, and then we threw them on the scale, and there you go. But so many things, weeks and months of preparation, go into that couple of hours of sweating it out in a sauna, or what seems like sweating out in a sauna.
That's it. Great points. Now I want to move into something a little more specific, is the depletion phase. And I know we're starting to, run a little, got about 20 minutes left or so if you guys all have time here. So maybe we'll move a little bit faster with some of our replies. The depletion phase. So as we're entering into the final cut, and we say, is it soft cut, hard cut? Our goal is to only soft cut on the way to the scale, have no hard cuts, right? We're looking to, drop maybe 1 to 3 pounds, 2 to 3 times, and then be done with it. Shit, that's knocking on the door of a 10-pound cut. We can float weight overnight even. And ideally what we try and do, even now if we do consulting, but towards the end, we want our athletes to be on weight the night before a morning weigh-in, and we say we pre-hydrate the athlete. We get the athlete on weight. Maybe we put 2+ pounds back into them. They wind up floating that overnight. They wake up, step on, and they're on the scale. And Charles, I think you've seen that before when we've been with you. It's super easy. There's no stress. Part of this is managing the psychology, of course, but the athlete has to be damn compliant in the training camp. So they're weight ready 3 weeks out. Ideally, we have composition exactly where we need to be. And, we can actually increase food intake getting closer to the scale so they don't burn that weight off because they're already ready to go. But I digress. This has allowed us to more competently manage sodium and water. And that's really what this comes down to. We're not trying to calorie deplete an athlete to the best of our ability to do so, right? We're not trying to glycogen deplete a glycolytic athlete, right? That's counterintuitive to the best of our ability to do so, right? So these are some tricks that we can pull, but we really try not to. As we get into that depletion phase, and we'll kind of use best case and then, or worst case and then best practices maybe. Many coaches out there and teams out there, just through, lack of experience maybe, or, the way it's always been done, they drop salt, they drop carbs, drop salt, go to distilled water a week out or so. What Charles has said, they start to water deplete 5 days out. Well, shit, they're already dehydrated day 4, day 3, day 2. There's nothing left by the time they actually get into a tub or a sauna. Fuck, they might as well just get on a stretcher and go straight to the hospital at that point, right? So how do you try and structure, and we'll talk more towards best practices here, not worst. How do you try and structure the management of electrolytes going into depletion? And the goal, our goal, speaking first person perspective, the goal is to never dehydrate. Like we try and, take their weight down, skim the surface, and then bring them back up before we ever cross that line. And that's the goal. Do we always accomplish it? Of course not, but that's always what we fight towards. So how do you kind of structure that in the lead in? And then the second question, which you can tag onto, is the methodology that you use to actually wring out that last, 1 to 9 pounds, depending on weight class of water. Like, how do you kind of tie that in just for those listening so the average person here can understand, but also to kind of give a better picture of how this can be done, how something unsafe can be done as safely as possible is probably the accurate way to state this. Maybe Tony, you jump in.
Mike, it's you hit the key term. It's really adherence, because whether or not you're playing catch up or pulling more water and pulling more salt, generally speaking, it's this. I want to get rid of every ounce of body fat that I can, that I know the fighter can still perform optimally at a given percentage if I have a record of it. Right? If they go in at 12 and I know they fought at 9 and their physiology looked pretty good, well, then that's 5 or 6 more pounds of water, or maybe another pound of muscle that I got to get out of them. So the key thing is, if I get adherence, all of the aforementioned things that you said they may not be need for restrictive glycogen depletion. So I think what I try to do is stay on top of them and let them know, okay, if we continue at this pace, we're going to land here, and this is where we need to be. I'm only going to have to knock 5-6 pounds of water out of you because we're getting rid of everything that doesn't have to be there. And in most cases, it is that extra percentage of body fat. So I have to monitor that closely with them and often negotiate. As far as things such as, I don't sodium deplete, I don't have them at it. But if I'm have clients training in Florida, okay, in the summer, and that's their camp, why in the blank would I have them sodium deplete?
Yep.
They've got more sodium coming out of them than they do carbon dioxide.
Yep.
Okay, so that's the last thing I have to worry about. They're just leaking sodium left and right. So I won't even do that. I think what is very important for me, and how do I try to monitor it best, is 3 phases. 1, know the fat. Are we on track? If we're not, do we need to make caloric adjustments and gently say to them, you know what, we got to pull a little bit more of that fat on. 2, I must be completely cognizant of their water turnover. Okay, how much are they generally losing in a training session? So I know how easy they leak. If it's a pound or 2, maybe their water intake is not sufficient. Maybe the climate is too warm. Maybe they don't sweat as optimal as they can. So the other thing I need to know is how much do they leak, and am I putting it back? And of course, with the right diet, the colors that Tyler makes with his beautiful foods there, every optimal piece of food, we're going to get the sodium back. You can add some, certainly, okay? And I know that Jordan's using the sweat patches, which I like as well. But that's it. First, fat. Are we on track? 2, water. Are they turning it over? How fast is it coming back? A lot of guys would say to me, Tony, I lost 6 pounds in training, and 2 hours later, I put it all back. Well, that's the point. That's the best thing that could happen. What are you complaining about? That's exactly what I wanted to happen, right? And then the other thing too is I'm well aware of an estimated amount of carbohydrate that they're taking in. Sure, they may be cheating, but if I have my athlete on 350 grams a day, right, and I pull them by 100 because not because I want to,
Yep.
but maybe because I have to, that 100 grams in carbohydrate is going to equal approximately, right, 400 grams if you put it in there with water. So now I know I've got an extra pound coming out just in glycogen depletion. And I know that I'm going to be able to facilitate, and Charles has helped me with this, and we've talked about it extensively, expedite that glycogen replenishment through the right practices, through elevating the insulin a bit. So my point to this is, Mike, if you get the adherence, there is no need for any of the extreme measures. It's a soft landing. You land on 2 feet and you don't hear it. The extreme glycogen pulls and I don't even overload in my water. Yeah. Take water in high volume all the time. You will leak it more effectively. You will sweat it more effectively. And then we'll put it back more effectively. If everything's controlled properly, you are talking changes in glycogen that are minimal. I don't cut the sodium if they leak like I said, like a waterfall, because they're pushing it out. And I'll make a sodium adjustment if they're holding on to a little bit more of that water and we're in trouble. Yeah. Everything could be adjusted and painted with a little brush if you have adherence. Yep. If you don't have adherence, then it's the extreme measures.
Awesome. Jordan, how about you?
Yeah, I think when we're talking about especially this last fight week and the acute weight loss strategies, I think we can all agree that I always describe it as the alphabet. We know what to do and we know what the outcome will be. We've got A and we've got Z, but we don't have a lot of the letters in between, right? So there's a lot of, not guesswork, but there's a lot of very educated guesses within. And I guess it really comes back to that point we're all hammering home is what can this individual athlete's body support? And we do a lot with our athletes where we call it Sherlock periods, where right before their camps or outside of their camp, we'll run a fake fight week. So we can see, okay, if we manipulate fluid, if we manipulate sodium, if we manipulate glycogen, if we get in the tub, what are those numbers looking like? Because a lot of the time we've got theoretical numbers, right? Like I would say we can pretty safely take 10% of someone's body weight through fluid and sodium and then be pretty confident that we can get that back in and send them pretty safely into the cage the next night. Does everyone respond to that number? No. It's like Dr. Reed Reel said to me the other day, if you've got someone who's 7'2" and they're a freak of nature, you don't say, hey, no, don't put them in the NBA. What do? You push them into basketball as early as you can. So if you've got an athlete that can sweat 10%, all of their biomarkers, all of the tests that you're running, they seem fine. It's probably advantageous and in your best interest as a performance coach to put them in a weight class where they can utilize that. But it all comes back to can that athlete's body support it? Because I think we've all know the stories where we've done everything right. We've done all the assessment. You do the weight descent. You get to fight week. Oh, this is great. I'm the best ever to do this. And then you do all these strategies and you get to the bath and then you got 2-3% to go and they're just not sweating. And you're going, what? Like what's happening? Where did I go wrong? And it's just for that person's body. And I think where we're at with combat sports nutrition science as it is, I don't think we have enough research or enough mechanistic understanding where we can all sit around and go, okay, you did all this, and we can unfold it to the level where we could probably pinpoint the problem and then go, okay, let's work backwards and figure out what we did wrong and we can fix that. We're not quite there yet. So I think it's so imperative for that athlete's safety that you just figure out what works with their individual body.
Yep. Excellent. Charles?
Just with regards to fight week itself, some of the strategies we employ. So just for all the viewers' awareness, the UFC PI provides complimentary food, supplements, rehydration to any athlete that wants it. And over fight week, as I mentioned earlier, we have to assess nutritional status of the athlete. So Mr. Keto, who's coming into fight week on a ketogenic diet, doesn't have much muscle glycogen to pull, right? So versus someone who has been, working closely with Tony, for instance, comes in, and I know this athlete has up to 3% of their body mass that can be manipulated if necessary. So there are components of the human body that we can classify as non-essential, as in they're modifiable within a short period of time. And I can't stress enough, ideally a short period of time. Muscle glycogen, liver glycogen being a component, gut mass, so fiber essentially. And if necessary, let's say the athlete had prolonged travel, access to rolling subway, and the amount of sweat he was able to have during the travel period was lower, we can reduce the amount of sodium in the food over fight week. So those are essentially the components that we can modify if necessary. If an athlete comes in at 6% over and is super confident, we can modify as little as possible, keep that athlete as nourished as possible going into the acute weight cut and performing beautifully. So those are the components that we really modify over fight week.
Excellent. Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to add, because one thing you'll find, and we've all kind of had this discussion, is everyone who's kind of the best at doing this all kind of agree. Like we're all kind of in the same recommendations, and if we have anything, we just pull it from each other and get more information. But to give just kind of a basic of what that looks like, to provide some more information of for the general public, just kind of curious. In the perfect world, which it does exist sometimes for fighters, it's very rare, but it happens. I don't do anything with their carbohydrates if I can. I mean, these guys are eating carbohydrates like crazy. Again, it's a glycolytic activity. They need to have glycogen. I won't work with a keto athlete. I've had a few that were following a ketogenic diet that have contacted me on short notice. I can't do it. Sorry. I mean, it's just not. Juice isn't worth the squeeze for me to deal with an already losing situation. But at the same at the same time, my goal is for them to show up perfectly recovered. I tell these guys, like, hey, the last few weeks are your toughest weeks of training. That's where we're trying to peak. But my job is to feed you in a way that you show up recovered. If you don't show up recovered, we're in trouble. I mean, that is our first and foremost, our goal. I want them to arrive to fight week on a Tuesday. It actually technically starts on a Tuesday if their weigh-ins are Friday. I want them to show up feeling the best they've ever felt. If they already arrive, feeling really crummy because maybe they have already cut their water or they've cut their carbs real down, we're in a bad spot. I want this to be the easiest week these fighters have had. It shouldn't be nearly as hard as the week before, because the week before or the 2 weeks before should have been the hardest moments of their training. This is the week to sit down, chill out, relax. We got to cut the weight, but I want them to be fully recovered. So we don't pull those carbs. I don't pull the sodium. The sodium doesn't really start going down for most of those people till they arrive on Tuesday. and trifecta takes over, or if I'm there in person cooking their food, and I do, and then, even then, I see all these crazy techniques people are still doing, boiling their chicken and just doing all this really, really weird, outdated stuff. We just cut the sodium down. I don't pull the water. We increase the water a bit, but we don't even really what I would call hyperload. A lot of my opinions on that have changed a lot, in recent times. And me and Jordy have had this conversation a whole lot. If it's unfair to take two athletes that are drinking different amounts throughout their fight camp and tell them both, hey, you need to go with 2 gallons of water a day. Maybe one's a 135-pound athlete and one's a 205-pound athlete. And I just told them both to drink the same amount of water because this is what a water cut looks like. That's just silly. So I kind of try to see what they've been drinking during camp. If they've worked with me all camp, I know how much they've been drinking. And we just go up a slight surplus from there, nothing crazy. And I don't ever pull the water completely. Even to the minute they're actually cutting weight, I tell them, like, hey, if you are physically thirsty, know the difference between emotional thirst and physically thirsty. But in that last 12 hours or so, if you're physically thirsty, I want you to drink. Like, take a drink. And you actually have to talk some of these guys into drinking. And I tell them, like, listen, this is a physiological response. This is a response your body is signaling because it feels thirsty. And I promise you, you don't, anyone who tries to trick the body loses. You're not going to win that battle. We want to work with the body. So if you're thirsty, okay, let's take a drink. No big deal. And I stress the importance of that. We don't stop eating. I have these guys eat. They're still eating every few hours. They're eating all the way until even after. These guys. I've had guys that have had a really rough weight cut that night. They had to cut a lot of weight. They're still going to have to cut some weight in the morning. I'm like, all right, we're going to get a couple things of fruit now. I'm going to push carbs into these guys after they just had a tough weight cut. Where previously some of these guys were going 24 hours without cutting weight. And, it's just, we just don't do that. We just don't deny the body what the body needs, because we're about to ask the body to help us out a lot. When we need the body firing on all cylinders, doing exactly what it was designed to do, or we're screwed. It's not a fight against the body. It's a fight with the body. And then we're just going to hope that it plays along with us.
Yeah, what's interesting is this group is amongst the most successful in the sport, and then every protocol listed is amongst the most passive, right? Nobody here resorts to extreme weight cutting techniques. Nobody here resorts to extreme caloric deprivation, extreme dehydration, extreme restriction. Where those that do, unfortunately, they're the ones that have the biggest health issues, and then the largest percentage of failures, unfortunately, at the expense of the athlete. Now, as we're winding down this conversation, let's have a little bit of fun. Give me a trick, something that nobody else knows, that's almost proprietary to you or to your system, or maybe just something that you do that's a little bit different for your athlete during fight week. To maybe it's just the way you conduct your cut, something that you use, a protocol, temperature of the bath water, a way you tweak your electrolyte solution. Lord knows, maybe you tickle the bottom of their foot because there's some sort of physiological effect. I don't know. I don't do that one. But hey, what about you? What do you guys? Anybody have anything special that you do that's kind of like a trademark that you find benefit that maybe those listening will pick up?
Yeah, well, I thought the foot tickle was proprietary, but
I heard about that. I heard DC told me.
Yeah. I thought that was just my thing, but I try to find a way to connect with the fighters. Like I really try to make it like their day, especially after they've made weight. I think it's been one of the coolest things I've ever been able to do, actually, for a fighter. I think of I just try to personalize it. So I knew Frankie. I was working with Frankie Edgar. I knew Frankie was a huge CT Fletcher fan. Okay. And I happened to have a network with CT Fletcher. So we reached out to CT Fletcher and had CT Fletcher do a custom video for Frankie, and just giving the whole, one more set and all that stuff. But I just knew that would make Frankie's day. So I had that done beforehand, and I waited until right at the moment where, that the things start getting a little bit harder and things are tough. And I'm like, hey, Frankie, man, someone wants to talk to you. And I showed him that thing, and it was just like everything just lit up. He was like, "Oh my gosh, man, that's so cool!" He used to, spend the rest of the weight cut talking about that. I just try to find some way, whether it's a movie or like Jordy said, a song. Songs are amazing. I do something very similar. I have fighters create their own. I just try to find any one little personal way to try to connect with them and just bring that up at the right time and try to use that at the right time.
Gotcha. Right on. Charles?
I'm going to give the boring generic answer. I'll be honest. I really don't think anything that I do in particular is different or special than I think honestly, I'll say that I pull a lot of knowledge from so many of the experts all across the world. And I think what we do well here, especially the UCPI, is melding it together, making the athlete having an individualized approach to the athlete's care. And really, I think that's what in the end sets us apart, is the ability to meld all these things together.
I'll kind of tag on yours. I think one that stands out that you might not know, but you actually said it, is your stability. Like your stability, you never waver. You always have a smile. Like you're always so friendly. You're always so reassuring. Well, that's the mark of a competent professional. You're very confident in your abilities once you have. So just to kind of, to those listening, but also as a credit to you also, you have that very reassuring quality about you. I've never seen you flustered, and I've never seen you say, well, fuck, I don't know, or oh, we'll see. It's like, sure, no problem. Even though it probably is a problem, but it never is. It's never communicated. And most of the time, the athlete's typically standing right there, or, someone that's important in the camp. So to you, it is that unwavering stability, and also your personality. You have that very reassuring characteristic to you that goes so far in such a traumatic sport, traumatic situation. So thumbs up, brother. Tony, how about you?
It's a big part of what Charles does. And for, learning new things is wonderful. New stimuli is fantastic. Not when you're fighting for 500 grand. It's not. So that week, that's not the time to be using new neural pathways and being diverted. So I think keeping them calm and I really do. Keeping the familiarity, staying happy, and spinning everything as positive. Yeah. I think it annoys them sometimes, but I do it. Tony, I didn't sweat that much. Good. You're going to need that water later anyway.
Yep. No
matter what happens, I'll make it good. I'll be happy. We'll be cool. I'll keep them relaxed. That's it. It's all just, that's cool. Oh yeah. I'm a little tired. You're supposed to be. You earned it. You trained hard. We'll go to sleep tonight. That's it. No matter what it is, we are going to make it positive, and it's the right thing that should be happening to make you better for Saturday night. That's it.
Yep. Amen, brother. Jordan.
Yeah, I'll just add quickly for Charles. I think Charles is probably the most forward-thinking person in this entire field, and I've learned so much in practice from his safe and boring approach to fight week. So I'll give him that one, but nothing like too crazy. But I'll say this now because I never wanted it to get filmed, but it has been filmed on Embedded and whatnot a couple of times. Is anyone who's done a weight cut with these guys and gone through that whole journey with them through fight camp, it's like a very intimate journey, right? And you get very attached with these guys and very close to them. And I'm a big guy on like overheating and like, I call it like flattening the curve. Like you get the core body temperature up and you do what you can to flatten the curve and keep it. And we use ice cubes a lot, and we rub ice cubes. And in principle, if you put that on paper and I say that to you guys, it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But when you do it in practice, it's a very almost bizarre looking thing. And, I've had cameras up in my face where you're kind of like rubbing an ice cube on people's face. It's a very intimate, it's a very special moment, but it was always something I was like, oh man, I hope this never gets filmed. Like my buddies back home who don't understand this are just going to be like, what the hell is this guy doing? So that's something we do a lot, but that was something I never wanted to get out to the public, and now it's everywhere.
Yeah, it's everywhere. Right on. That's funny. I'm sure all your buddies probably have some fun things to say about that.
Yeah.
Until they cut weight.
Yeah.
Then you should probably, if anybody has a joke, just have them do a weight cut, and then let's see if they're asking for the ice cubes.
That's right.
Well, gentlemen, we are at the 90-minute mark, and that's what I requested of you. So I really do appreciate you guys for being here. I mean, we're just literally scratching the surface. There's I have about 20 other topics I would have loved to have jumped in here. So I really appreciate that. I'd love to get you guys back on more as this group, maybe slightly smaller groups, and kind of go back and forth. I think one exciting point that maybe we can think about next time is I'd love to talk about some things that we do differently. Not a debate at all, but like, hey man, Tyler does it one way, I do it another way. Tony, Jordan, Charles, we all do it. You know, I'm trying to get Tristan Kennedy, Connor's nutritionist, trying to get him on, and you know, Andy Galpin, and you know, Corey Peacock, and just some of the other, you know, guys out there in the industry. If you have any recommendations that, you know, just please, you know, afterwards send them to me, because I know there's some other great names. I want to get Algieri on there, Tony. I know he's a renaissance man in the game, actually, you know, just fucking awesome. There's so many amazing coaches out there. Unfortunately, they're in the minority from the fucking turds. Pardon my language. And I really just want to highlight the experts and also show, like, you know, my way, I'm very confident in it, but my way isn't the only way. So I think kind of have like a little bit of a different approach maybe next time. What are some of the things? And maybe we can kick around some topics offline. And this is for the viewer watching. Kick around some topics offline that we say, hey man, I'd really love to have a discussion of like, man, I never use saunas, don't agree with saunas, no plastics, no nothing, never, ever, ever. And then maybe one of you does and say, hey, well, let's have a chit chat about that. Like, you know, I like fiber. I keep fiber in my athlete's diet all the way through to the end. I know some of the other coaches and weight management coaches don't do that, don't like that. I'd love to have that type of respectful conversation, and it's point counterpoint, right? So I think that'll be you know, maybe elevate us all a little bit, but certainly the viewer, and then anything else, of course, you know, a little bit of like a roundtable conversation down the road. But again, I am a fan of everybody in this room. I have deep admiration and respect for what you guys do. I am so happy that you're out there helping these athletes live healthy lives. Most importantly, we know that because they're working with you, that they will be able to, you know, show their great grandchildren about the time they won UFC world titles and made all the money and whatnot, as they still have all of their faculties about them, which is super important. I know that's why we're all in it. So gentlemen, thank you so much. And everyone, just briefly, let me try and pull this up here, can follow you guys. So Tyler Minton is Tyler Minton Nutrition on Instagram. We have Fight Shape Ricci, that is Tony Ricci. We have the Fight Dietitian, Jordan Sullivan, and the Angry Dietitian, Charles Stool. Of course, everyone can find you, will find you. I'll put some links and whatnot down below these videos. And I strongly suggest everyone who likes anything that I talk about, follows anything I talk about, definitely adds you guys to their book of knowledge, just follows everything you guys do, everything you say, all the content, because everybody here puts out great content. Also, Charles, you need to put more content out on your Instagram page, buddy. I need more of your brilliance and wisdom out there. The world is starving for it, my friend. But gentlemen, thank you all so much. You guys are incredible, and I definitely look forward until the next time.
Thank you, Mike.
Appreciate it, buddy.
All right, guys. Have a good day. Have a good night, everyone. We'll talk soon. I'll shoot a follow-up email just to thank you guys again. Thank you all.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Yes.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye.